College football spring games are here. We'll go over every spring game for every team in the Power 5, plus what should you watch for in Clemson's spring game. That's next. I'm Jay Smith, and this is After Further Review.
And now, after further review, a Clemson student's perspective on sports.
There's a personal foul on number 99 of the defense. After he tackled the quarterback, he's giving them business down there. That's a 15-yard penalty.
Well, welcome in, everyone. I'm Jay Smith, and this is After Further Review. Thanks so much for tuning in, whether you're listening to AFR as a podcast on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts, or if you're watching on Facebook, do appreciate it as always. It's Friday, so that means it's time for another episode, and this is an exciting one. Spring ball is here. We've Obviously, some teams have got games scheduled, at different times of the month, but April is really the start of spring games for college football. And, obviously we had that hiatus of spring football, because of COVID-19, the onset of that last year. But a handful of teams have really already completed their spring drills and games. We've actually seen a few, but for most of the Power 5, the drills are getting underway, and April and May is where we're going to see some, busy months for spring games, and it's going to be exciting to watch. Should be at least a handful of games every week that you're going to want to watch and pay attention to. Obviously this is, the spring games are, I don't think you should put too much stock in what you see in a spring game. It is a little bit of a peek through the window at what you might see in the fall. Typically, though, it's an opportunity for coaches to kind of go through their depth chart, right, to see how new guys perform on the field in a somewhat high-pressure situation. I mean, again, you're playing in front of a crowd. Typically, there's crowds at spring games. Some schools draw big crowds, some schools don't. But it's really an opportunity outside of practice to figure out how a guy might respond in a as realistic a game scenario as you're going to be able to play. I mean, it's essentially the only thing it's the only preseason that college football has, right? The NFL, you've got 4 weeks of a preseason. I think now actually this year, this upcoming season for the NFL, they are expanding the regular season to 17 games. Instead of the 16 that they've been playing. Now, I don't think the preseason has increased. I think it's still a 4-game preseason. But college football, you really don't have that, right? You just jump in kind of head first. Some schools will play, non-conference games to kind of get the train slowly rolling. And then there's other schools out there that'll start out with a bang in like a Chick-fil-A kickoff game in Atlanta or some other, I can't remember the name of the one they play in Jerry's World in Dallas, but there are those kinds of events that really kick off the season with big matchups. But in terms of spring games, it's your college football preseason is what it is. And so it's exciting. It's obviously nice to see, fans back in the stadiums, players on the field. That is something that I certainly won't take for granted ever again, just with how COVID disrupted all of that. But either way, again, these next couple of months, April and May, is really going to be when spring games are ramping up, and we're going to see a lot of them. So we're going to go through each of the spring games that have been announced or haven't been announced. We're going to go through every Power 5 team. We're going to go through every Power 5 team and look at the teams and when their spring games are scheduled and where you can watch them if that's something that's interesting to you. But we're going to start off. We'll just go alphabetical. We'll start off in the ACC and go through the teams here. So we got Boston College. Their spring games is scheduled for April 24th. That's a Saturday. It's going to be available on the ACC network. No announcement on time yet, but again, on a Saturday, you got to imagine it'll probably be early to mid-afternoon. Clemson's spring game, which we'll actually talk about the second half of the show, since it's the one that's upcoming here. It's tomorrow on Saturday, April 3rd, 1 in the afternoon on ACC Network. Duke has already played their spring game back on March 27th. That was last Saturday. Florida State plays their spring game next weekend on April 10th at 5 p.m. on the ACC Network. Georgia Tech is playing their spring game on Friday, April 23rd at 6 p.m. on the ACC Network. Louisville so far has not scheduled a spring game, so there's no announcement on time, dates, or network. So we're not sure if the Cardinals are going to play a spring game, but again, there's no announcement so far. Miami is scheduled for Saturday, April 17th at 11 a.m. on the ACC Network. That's kind of an interesting kickoff time. Usually, spring games kick off between 1 to 3 in the afternoon, so an 11 a.m. kickoff is a tad early. But again, you kind of see the pattern here, right? So like Clemson's April 3rd, Florida State's April 10th, Miami's April 17th. Georgia Tech is April 23rd. Boston College is April 24th. So you're going to have, if you're an ACC fan and you want to watch the ACC spring games, you're not going to have to do a lot of channel flipping, which is nice. You're just going to, you're going to stick to the ACC network. That's where all of these spring games are going to be broadcast. And, you'll be able to watch whatever team is playing that particular weekend. North Carolina has their spring game scheduled for Saturday, April 24th at 3 p.m. on the ACC Network. NC State's playing their spring game Saturday, April 10th at 1 p.m. on the ACC Network. Pitt is scheduled for Saturday, April 17th at 1 p.m., again on the ACC Network. And Syracuse has announced they're planning to do a spring game, but it's still all to be determined. So Syracuse right now is TBD on everything. The last team remaining in the ACC that has scheduled a spring game is Virginia. It's pretty far off. It's actually May 1st, Saturday, May 1st. Haven't nailed down a time or a network yet. Again, you'd imagine it would be on the ACC network, but Virginia playing in May. So a few weeks away if you want to watch that one. Virginia Tech is the third ACC team so far that has not scheduled a spring game. No announcement from Virginia Tech, unlike Syracuse, who said they're interested in doing one. So Virginia Tech and Louisville are the two ACC teams who have not given any indication that they're going to be playing a spring game. And then to wrap up the ACC, you've got Wake Forest, who has not scheduled anything yet, but has, like Syracuse, announced that they're interested and would like to play a spring game. So four schools in the ACC so far have not gotten anything scheduled, those being Louisville, Syracuse, Virginia Tech, and Wake Forest. But again, all the other schools that have, the dates, are pretty spread out. So you're going to, throughout the month of April, you're going to have an opportunity to turn on the ACC network and watch some ACC, some spring games. So, and again, we're going to talk about the Clemson spring game specifically, what to watch for that, because that's probably going to be one of the more interesting spring games, not just in the ACC, but really across the country, just because, it's the first time in 4 years that Clemson's going to be doing a spring game without Trevor Lawrence or Travis Etienne. So you got to think that, you're going to, for the first time in several years, at least at Clemson, you're going to have an opportunity to see some fresh faces, and I think it's going to be an exciting spring game to watch. Let's move on though to the Big Ten. The Big Ten now is a little bit more scattered all over the place. So the Big Ten is not quite as planned out, and they've also scheduled their spring games a little bit later in April and kind of bleeding into May a little bit. Let's start off though with Illinois. Their spring game scheduled for Monday, April 19th at 8 p.m. on the Big Ten Network. And then you kind of got to go a little ways because Indiana has announced they've canceled their spring game. They've just straight up said that we're not going to be able to play. Iowa is still TBD. They have not announced a schedule for that, a timeline for their spring game. Maryland has penciled in Saturday, April 24th, but they have not decided on a time. So, we'll see what happens there. Michigan has not indicated that they're going to be playing a spring game. No announcement of a schedule or a timeline. Michigan State has penciled in April 24th, like Maryland, but they have not announced the time. So you imagine that Maryland and Michigan State might be trying to figure out who's going to play earlier, who's going to play later, possibly. You'd imagine they'd both be on the Big Ten Network. Minnesota has not announced plans for a spring game. Nebraska has announced that they want to play on Saturday, May 1st, but they have not decided on a time or a network yet. Northwestern has indicated they'd like to play a spring game, but again, all TBD. You see the difference between the ACC and the Big Ten. Now, I'm not saying that this spring game planning is going to be indicative of the success the ACC is going to have in the fall compared to the Big Ten, but it's still an interesting comparison. We went through the ACC. You had 4 schools that haven't scheduled spring games. 2 have indicated that they likely will not have one, and then 2 are still working on it. Look at the Big Ten. The only school we've talked about so far who wants to play a spring game, has scheduled it, and it's on the calendar, is Illinois. And you remember the Illinois team that we discussed it a lot. It was actually one of the schools that I picked in last week's show when talking about, the year of the super senior and which teams stand to benefit the most. As I said at the top of the show, spring games in college football are your preseason. And if Illinois, a team that's, they were 2-6 last year, but they have all these super seniors coming back, it could be that, a spring game kind of gives them a springboard into the season, and you might see them perform well, especially in the first few weeks, because they're going to have more snaps under their belt than, the Indianas, the Michigans, the Minnesotas of the conference. So interesting, to see the differences here between the ACC and the Big Ten. But continuing on, I think where did we leave off? We left off at Northwestern. Yeah, we left off at Northwestern. So Ohio State is, I think, they have scheduled the spring game for Saturday, April 17th, but they have not announced a time. Penn State and Purdue have both said they do not plan to play a spring game. Rutgers has penciled in Saturday, May 1st, but has not announced a time or a network. And Wisconsin is still in the TBD category. So again, throughout the entire conference, which I imagine this will change as the weeks go on, right? There are several schools we listed: Maryland, Michigan State, Nebraska, Ohio State, Rutgers. Not exactly your heavy hitters, except for Ohio State. I mean, Rutgers, Nebraska, Michigan State, Maryland, and Illinois. Who's the outlier there? It's Ohio State. Everybody else is like bottom feeders, at least within the Big Ten Conference. So very interesting to see Ohio State as one of the only top-tier team in the Big Ten who's indicated they're interested in scheduling a spring game, and they actually have picked a date. Now, again, the logistics and the time and the network have still to be determined. You imagine, though, they will figure that out. But it's really interesting to see Indiana straight up canceling their spring game. Michigan saying they're not going to play a spring game. Penn State saying they're not going to play a spring game. Wisconsin has indicated nothing about them playing a spring game. So again, we talked a lot last season about the gap between Ohio State and the rest of the conference. And going into the year, I thought, as did many people, it was going to be a competitive year in the Big Ten. I really felt like there were 4 to 5 teams that could compete in the Big Ten and give Ohio State some trouble. And obviously that didn't end up happening, except for Indiana, which kind of came as a surprise to myself and again a lot of other people. I was expecting Penn State to at least compete. I was expecting Minnesota or Wisconsin or Michigan to at least be in the conversation at the end of the season, and they weren't. So it's interesting to see again the differences between how the ACC has approached the spring game scheduling as opposed to the Big Ten. But I'd imagine we will still see some spring games coming out of the Big Ten. Just we'll have to figure out, these schools will have to decide on logistics and all that in the upcoming weeks. All right, let's move on now to the Big 12. Let's start off with Baylor. They have announced their spring game dates as Saturday, April 24th. They've decided on a 1 p.m. time slot, but obviously they have not their network. The channel that will be carried on is TBD, so we don't know what network that'll be available on. Iowa State has indicated they plan to play a spring game, but it's all TBD at this point. Keep an eye on Iowa State. As we talked about last week's show, Iowa State, a program that's really up and coming, not just in the conference but nationally. If there's a spring game in the Big 12 that I want to watch, it'll be Iowa State. So I'm definitely going to be paying attention to see what the Cyclones decide to do. Kansas, for what it's worth, has announced their spring game on Saturday, Saturday, May 1st. No time or channel has been announced yet. Kansas State has said they are not going to be playing a spring game. Oklahoma, the other big, noteworthy team in the Big 12, has their entire schedule for the spring game laid out. Saturday, April 24th, 5 p.m., kicking off on Bally Sports, Oklahoma. I would imagine that's a regional channel, and I don't think, unless it gets picked up by ESPNU, it's probably not going to have national coverage. So, again, so far the only school in the Big 12 that has at least got the network is Oklahoma, the defending champions. Moving on to Oklahoma State, they are also playing on Saturday, April 24th, but they're kicking off at 1 p.m., a little bit earlier in the afternoon. Still TBD on the network. TCU has penciled in Saturday, April 17th at noon. No network announcement yet. And Texas is Saturday, April 24th. No announcement on time or network, so they're playing the same day that Oklahoma State decide to play. It'll be interesting to see when Texas schedules their time. I'd imagine it'll be, again, early to mid-afternoon. Oklahoma's is a little later at 5 p.m., but still, that Saturday, April 24th is shaping up to be probably the most interesting day in terms of spring football for the Big 12. And then to finish off with the last two teams, you got Texas Tech scheduled for Saturday, April 17th. No time or network has been announced. And then West Virginia is scheduled for Saturday, April 24th at 1 p.m. So we got, five teams from the Big 12 are planning to play their spring games on Saturday, April 24th. You got Baylor, Oklahoma State, and West Virginia kicking off at 1 p.m. And then you have Oklahoma kicking off at 5, and then Texas is still not announced what time they'll be kicking off on the 24th. So the big day for spring football in the Big 12 is certainly April 24th. That's when you're going to want to tune in. But again, no announcement really as far as the networks on who's going to cover. So it may be hard to watch a lot of these spring games. We'll just have to see. Moving on to the Pac-12, Arizona has announced their spring game date as Saturday, April 24th. No time or network yet has been announced. Arizona State has not indicated that they're going to be playing a spring game. Nothing is scheduled for them right now. Cal has actually already played their spring game back on March 20th. Colorado is scheduled for Friday, April 30th. Still need to determine a time and a network. Oregon is slated for Saturday, May 1st. Again, no time or network has been determined yet. You see kind of the theme here with a lot of these. Now, the ACC did have the ACC network penciled in for all of this. And it's kind of surprising that, at least in the Big Ten and the Pac-12, you're not seeing these schools schedule it with their Pac-12 network and the Big Ten network. I don't think, is there a Big 12 network? I know there's the Longhorn network, but I don't know if the Big Ten, I imagine they've got to have one. Let's see here. The Big 12, so this is what I just found right here on a quick search. The Big 12 is the only Power 5 league without its own standalone network. So ESPN has the rights over the the next 3 Big 12 football championship games, but there is no Big 12 network. Interesting. So the only Power 5 league without one. But either way, again, going back here to the Pac-12, you've got Colorado scheduled for Friday, April 30th. No time, network, or announced. Yeah, we've already been through Colorado and Oregon, Saturday, May 1st. Oregon State is scheduled for Saturday, May 8th. No time or network announced yet. Stanford is still TBD on everything. They have not picked a date yet. USC is slated for Saturday, April 17th at 4 p.m. Still no announcement on a network. UCLA is TBD on everything. No announcement of a date yet. Utah, the first team here. Really, the first team in the Pac-12 who's got everything planned out. Utah is kicking off Saturday, April 17th at 3 p.m. on the Pac-12 network. Again, the network that you're likely to see pick up most of these spring games. I mean, that's what makes the most sense here. Washington is going to kick off on May 1st. Time, network to be announced. Washington State is to be determined on everything. They have not picked a date, time, or network yet. So far, I mean, you can see we've gone through 4 of the 5 Power 5 conferences. You know, the ACC, the Big 10, the Big 12, the Pac-12, and the ACC is by far, so far, you know, the most mapped out in terms of spring games and dates and times and the network. I mean, really, the dates and the times, I mean, you've got to have that. The network, I think, can be figured out as you go along, but it's really interesting to see the differences between some of these conferences. Now, the SEC is, as you would expect, more like the ACC in that most of the schools have announced dates, times, and obviously SEC Network will be covering the spring games. There are a few exceptions. Alabama is going to get the primetime treatment Saturday, April 17th at 1 p.m. Their spring game will be on ESPN, carrying it on the major network. So that'll be, you'd imagine, attract some eyeballs. Arkansas will kick off the same day, Saturday, April 17th at 3 p.m. on SEC Network. Auburn is Saturday, April 17th, so same day as Alabama and Arkansas, but they're kicking off 2 p.m. on SEC Network. And important to note, these are SEC Network Plus, so you know it's similar to kind of how ESPN, when you go into the Watch ESPN app, and there's like all those ESPN 3 channels that you can kind of rotate through. That's what Arkansas and Auburn will be playing on. So if you just go to the regular SEC Network channel, I don't think you're going to get Arkansas or Auburn, unless it's a regional thing. I'm not entirely sure, but it's an important distinction that it is SEC Network Plus. Florida, moving on here, has not announced a spring game yet. One of the few teams in the SEC who has not made an announcement in terms of a spring game. Georgia slated to play April 17th on Saturday at 2 p.m. on SEC Network Plus. Kentucky, Wildcats have not announced anything as it relates to a spring game. Still TBD on everything. LSU is scheduled to play Saturday, April 17th. So again, you're seeing the date here in common is Saturday, April 17th. You got Alabama, Arkansas, Auburn, Georgia, and LSU all kicking off on April 17th. LSU's playing at 1 p.m. on SEC Network Plus. Ole Miss will be kicking off a week later, Saturday, April 24th at 5 p.m. on SEC Network Plus. Mississippi State kicks off, you guessed it, Saturday, April 17th at noon on SEC Network Plus. Missouri has actually already played their spring game back on March 20th. So that leaves you now just 4 teams in the SEC, and we complete our Power 5. South Carolina kicking off on April 24th at 2 p.m. On SEC Network Plus. Tennessee is the same day, Saturday, April 24th at 4 p.m. on SEC Network Plus. And A&M Same day, Saturday, April 24th at 2 p.m. on SEC Network Plus. The last team, if you care about them, the Commodores of Vanderbilt, they kick off on the 17th at noon on SEC Network. So you look at the SEC and you say, well, there's really two dates. It's April 17th and it's April 24th. You have 7 SEC teams kicking off on April 17th. Again, to list them off, you've got Alabama, Arkansas, Auburn, Georgia, LSU, Mississippi State, and Vanderbilt. And then if you want to watch on the 24th, you're going to have 4 options. You got Ole Miss, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Texas A&M. So 2 weeks really for spring football in the SEC. Again, Missouri has already completed their spring game back on March 20th, and Kentucky has not indicated that they're going to schedule a spring game. But really interesting, again, I know it might have gotten a little tedious listening to all those dates and times and networks, but it is interesting to see how some conferences like the ACC and the SEC have been much more proactive in the scheduling of these things. They've got the dates out there, the times where you can watch it. You look at the Big Ten, and only Ohio State is really the only notable team who has even decided that they're playing a spring game from the Big Ten. The Pac-12 is all over the place, and the Big 12 is similarly, it's kind of just all over the place, hit and miss. So it's interesting to see how some conferences are doing it more as a unit, and if we're all if one school's doing it, we're all going to try and do it, and then other conferences are taking a more it's kind of left up to the teams to decide. Seems like based off of the restrictions at that particular school, fan comfort level, and all those different factors that play into it. But again, SEC spring games won't really be kicking off until middle of April, and we'll definitely do a show here in a couple of weeks talking about the SEC Network spring games, what to watch, what to look for, some exciting things. And, as the other conferences, the Pac-12, the Big 10, the Big 12, play their spring games, I'll be sure to mention them and talk about, whatever noteworthy things happened in those games. But really, I think if you're a fan of college football, the ACC and the SEC are going to provide you with the best spring football games of any conference in the country this season. So, the most notable spring game coming up is obviously Clemson's spring game. Depending on when you're listening to the show, it may have already passed, but spring game for Clemson is scheduled tomorrow on Saturday, April 3rd. And again, as I mentioned at the top of the show, it really should be interesting to watch just because there's going to be so many new faces for Clemson. I mean, yes, DJ's, obviously we've seen him before, we've seen him perform, but there's going to be some new guys out there running back, some new guys out there on the O-line, some new guys out there at receiver. So I think Clemson, certainly with the way they ended last season, that blowout loss to Ohio State really left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths, especially Clemson fans, and just the way in which they lost that game, just being thoroughly beat down, not being able to get any sort of run game going, and then on the defensive side, not being able to stop Trey Sermon. I mean, letting him run all over Clemson all night long. Clemson hasn't been beat that badly a lot in the last 7 to 8 years. It's been a little while, and even after that game, I went through and said, listen, it's been since Florida State at home in the Jameis Winston era. It's been since West Virginia's bowl beatdown in the Orange Bowl back at, 2011, since Clemson's really been smashed like that on a national stage. And you got to think that this spring game for Clemson is going to be really, really important, and there's going to be a lot of people paying attention. So let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll do the second half of the show. We're going to get into the Clemson 2021 spring game preview, some things you need to watch, maybe look out for, and like I said, we'll get into it next. Welcome back to the show. Again, thanks so much for tuning in. I'm Jay Smith, and this is After Further Review. Spring football is here, man. It's exciting. I am looking forward to it. And the big game, the big spring game that's going to happen tomorrow, day before Easter, is the Clemson spring game. Now, we touched on this right before the break. Obviously, that blowout 49-28 loss to Ohio State in the All-State Sugar Bowl from last season stings the fans, stings the players, stings the coaches. It's been a minute since Clemson has been beat that badly on a national stage. I mean, they're used to beating other teams that badly, right? They're used to thrashing Alabama in a national championship game out in the Bay Area. They're used to blanking Ohio State in a semifinal Fiesta Bowl. They're used to holding Notre Dame to basically nothing in the what was that, it was out in Dallas. Would that have been why am I blanking on the name of that bowl game? It was a semifinal game. It was it was the Cotton Bowl. That would have been the Cotton Bowl. Yeah, I got the ticket hanging on the wall behind me. I had to look behind me. I don't know why I blanked on that name. But either way, right? Clemson's not used to losing by multiple touchdowns in a big game. That's just not something that they've really had to go through the last few years. So, again, a lot of eyeballs on the Tigers during the offseason, and some new faces coming in, obviously. DJ is replacing star quarterback Trevor Lawrence. And, there's some other pieces that Clemson has had to work on this offseason. One of the real issues that became very obvious during that loss to Ohio State was just how bad the O-line and the D-line had gotten, how far they had regressed from where they were 2-3 years ago, with the likes of, the big guys up front. I mean, it's just, the trenches for Clemson were a strength for several years, and when you lose guys like Vic Beasley, Christian Wilkins, I mean those big guys up there who make plays, it's hard to replace them. And Clemson again had a really tough time. They were far outmatched against Ohio State, and they just couldn't contain Trey Sermon. The run game that Ohio State was able to impose on Clemson for pretty much the entire night just illustrated, as the loss to LSU in the national championship the year prior illustrated about the secondary play for Clemson, that there was a serious gap there. I mean, again, you say what you want about Clemson's performance in the last couple of years and everything. I mean, going into that LSU game, they had won 29 straight. Okay, they were 15-0 that previous season, right, when they thrashed Alabama, and first 15-0 team in college football history in modern era. Come back the next year, they're 14-0. They're back in the championship again. They're trying to go 30-0 and get up there in the all-time elite win streaks of college football history, and get exposed, at least in the secondary, by Joe Burrow and LSU. I mean, it was just tough to watch Clemson try and cover those LSU receivers all night long. And that's not to say that Clemson wasn't talented back there. They just weren't prepared. And LSU in some areas was a little bit more talented than Clemson. When you match the guys up, you got a great corner and a great receiver, and the receiver more often than not in that matchup won out. So again, Clemson the last few years, they've had some games that have really shown where they're weak, where their weaknesses are. And so, this Ohio State game illustrated, hey, we got some issues on the D-line, and we got to clean up the trenches and get guys, to really make plays like we've been making the last 4, 5, 6 years. But with that said, let's talk about some things that you probably want to look for in this spring game. Now, DJ is obvious. Watching his performance, I think will be probably what most people are going to pay attention to, and that's fine. I feel confident in his abilities after watching how he played against Notre Dame on the road last season in a night game in a nationally televised game of the week scenario. I don't feel like I need to see more from DJ to feel comfortable with his abilities. Now, one game, you have to, you have to look at more than just a singular game in order to fully understand and assess a player's ability, right? It might take half this season before we can really say, yeah, Clemson feels like they can make the playoff again. Now, the expectation is there, and that's one of the hardest things about maintaining greatness. And that's what any coach will tell you, whether it's, Dabo or Saban or Meyer or whoever it is. It's maintaining that greatness that's the toughest challenge, because, Clemson has won 6 straight ACC championships. They've been to 6 straight college football playoffs. Even Alabama hasn't done that. Like, there's going to come a point where Clemson's not going to make a college football playoff, guys. It's going to happen, okay? And I'm not just saying, I'm not speaking here just to Clemson fans. I'm just speaking to college football fans in general. Eventually, Clemson's not going to make a college football playoff. Hell, they might not even win the ACC. Eventually, these ACC schools that are, that have been lagging for so long behind Clemson, North Carolina, Virginia Tech, Miami, Florida State, those programs are going to rebuild, and it's going to, the college football pendulum is going to swing. It's been swinging Clemson's way for a long time. I think a lot further than many people thought it would, including myself, a Clemson alum. Even when we were in our 3rd, 4th year of making the CFP, I was just like, I just don't know how much longer this is sustainable. And it has been sustainable because of how bad the ACC has been. That's not to say that Clemson hasn't put great teams on the field. They definitely have. But if Clemson was in a more competitive conference, it would be much more difficult. Clemson might have some stiffer competition like in an ACC championship game, but their regular season competition, at least in the ACC the last 3-4 years, has not been good at all because, again, schools like Virginia Tech and North Carolina and, Miami and Florida State, they have been awful. Now, you've had some teams kind of emerge. Syracuse was decent for a while. NC State has been decent, but it's still, the point is that Clemson has been at this elite level, and there's been no one in the conference to really challenge them. So I'm not saying this is the downfall of that dynasty or anything. I think Clemson will be fine. I think there's enough talent for them, to get back to an ACC championship, win an ACC championship, possibly make a college football playoff. But you also have to, I think, recalibrate your expectations every year. It's really hard to do. Because when you see Clemson playing, 15 games a year, 14, 15 games a year, and they don't lose any hardly, you just that's what you just come to expect, right? You just, if you're a Clemson fan now, you talk to some people and they're just like, well, it's not really a question of if we're going to win the ACC championship game. It's like, how bad are we going to beat the team that we're beat? It's like that mentality is dangerous because eventually reality is going to catch you and you're going to lose an ACC championship game or a regular season game. And Clemson's done that, right? They've dropped a game to Syracuse. They've dropped a game to Pitt. They almost lost to NC State at home. They needed overtime on a missed field goal to win that. So there's been games where Clemson, North Carolina 2 years ago, what was that, 21-20? I mean, there have been games where Clemson was the far more talented team, and they just got outplayed, outcoached the entire game. But they were still able to put together a stellar season. So with all that being said, for this spring game, I think fans need to really go into it with a fresh perspective, and they need to say, just like when when Taj Boyd left and Deshaun was coming in, the expectations were high, but people were also realistic in that, it's going to take time potentially for Deshaun to mature and get the program to where fans wanted it to be. And then when Deshaun left, Trevor Lawrence came in and people were excited and they were optimistic, but no one could have anticipated him winning 15 games and going 15-0 as a first-year starter, as a freshman. I mean, that just, the thought never even crossed my mind, really. I was like, well, if we play in an ACC championship this year, I will consider that a successful year. I'm not really expecting a conference title. I'm not expecting a CFP, because if you come to expect those things, you're going to be so disappointed when you don't get them. And the reality is that so few programs get to enjoy one of those experiences. And there's a lot of good programs out there that don't win conference championships. A&M last year was, a tiebreaker with Alabama away from being able to even compete for one. They were a decent program. Iowa State beat Oklahoma in the regular season, gets to the Big 12 championship and loses to Oklahoma in heartbreaking fashion. Indiana. I mean, there's so many good programs that don't get to enjoy near the spoils that Clemson has the last few years, and it's really difficult to stay humble. But I think this spring game and this upcoming season is going to be a good opportunity for the Tigers, both players, coaches, and fans, to kind of hit the reset button and recognize we had some serious flaws in the game last year against Ohio State and the year prior to LSU that weren't exposed in an ACC schedule, at least not in the past. Now, this coming year, it might be different. The ACC is starting to rebound, but in the past, a soft ACC schedule was not exposing the flaws Clemson had until they got on the big stage. And they're playing in Ohio State or they're playing in LSU, and these teams are good as Clemson. And that's when the flaws become apparent. And Clemson only has 60 minutes to respond, make adjustments. Sometimes they're able to do it, sometimes they're not. I think, it's been the case for the Tigers the last couple of years. With all that being said, though, some key areas to watch in the spring game for Clemson are, I think, first off, is the running backs. Usually tailbacks don't take center stage in a spring game. Usually it's a little bit more about, chucking the ball up, letting some receivers make big plays. But, this is going to be an opportunity for some fans and to get a really good look at five-star freshman Will Shipley, who is probably going to be competing for reps with last year's primary backup, Lynn J. Dixon, into the fall. I mean, you'd expect Shipley to I think get a lot of reps in the spring game, and if he performs well, he might be competing, I think, with Lynn J. Dixon for a starting spot. It's going to be interesting, I think, for Clemson because they've had a lot of depth at running back the last few years, but it's been dominated by Etienne. At least the starting job has, right? It was all Travis Etienne, one of the most productive running backs in ACC history. And so everybody behind Etienne just kind of got left in the dust. Well, now the dust has settled, and they're still runners on the track. Okay, they're in the starting blocks. All right, Etienne has done his lap. He's off to the pros. There's guys in the starting blocks again. The dust is settled. The starting gun's ready to go off. That's kind of what it feels like for the Clemson running back, part of the depth chart this coming fall, is that, again, Etienne was the lead horse for so long, and he did so much for the program, and he was, such a star player. But now there's going to be an opportunity for these new guys to come in and prove what they're made of. Lynn J. Dixon obviously is the veteran in terms of the running back group, but it's still, when you're at a school like Clemson and you have this kind of talent coming in, these 4-star, 5-star guys, you're going to have to compete for spots. Even if you're a veteran, you're going to have to compete for spots. So I think that'll be something to watch again. Really keep an eye on Will Shipley and see how many reps he's getting and what his performance is like compared to Lynn J. Dixon in the spring game for Clemson. Another thing to watch is really something that we already touched on a lot, and that is the trenches. Again, to reiterate, Clemson's performance against Ohio State illustrated that there were plenty of red flags in the trenches, both on offense and defense. Now, on offense, in 2020, we had let's see here. On offense in 2020, there were 4 first-year starters, and there was really not a lot of run blocking. Clemson averaged 1.8 yards per rush before contact, which that was down actually 32% from 2019, and that resulted in a change in play calling, right? Clemson was calling about 10% fewer rushing plays per game last season because they couldn't. There was no run blocking. The guy, Etienne didn't have, I think, as productive a year as a lot of people were expecting. Part of that was because the O-line just wasn't blocking for him and couldn't block for him. And that really hampered Etienne's ability to become a threat and force defenses to respect his ability. And it made Clemson kind of one-dimensional on offense, relying on Trevor Lawrence to play the hero and save the day. And you can only do that so many times before you get burned. So the O-line for Clemson is certainly something that you, I think, should watch for. I think obviously the D-line was outmatched against Ohio State too, as we touched on earlier. Trey Sermon really couldn't be contained by Clemson's D-line. The run game by Ohio State was just constant throughout, and it made Clemson have to respect it throughout the game. It also chewed up a lot of clock that Clemson could have used to put together an offensive drive. But again, that D-line run game issue has been a thing now for the past couple of years because the strength of Clemson's defense has really shifted from the D-line to linebackers. And your Ben Boulwares, your James Skalskis, those kinds of guys, with the loss of Vic Beasley, Christian Wilkins, and other big guys on the D-line, it's really been tough for Clemson to kind of reestablish that dominance on the D-line. Now, you've got some guys on Clemson's D-line, some sophomores, Miles Murphy, Brian Breesy, who should kind of fill that void. And the other thing that's important to note is that unlike last year, Clemson is kind of finishing the spring practice and everything season with relatively healthy depth chart. Last season they were kind of banged up. They had some issues with who was available to play, inexperienced depth. But this year things seem to be trending in the right direction for Clemson in terms of both the O-line and the D-line. And I would expect the play to be a little bit more consistent now that these guys have had more reps together. Again, you had 4 first-year starters in 2020 on the O-line. You got to think that they're going to come in with some experience. DJ's probably going to feel a little bit more comfortable knowing that he doesn't have a bunch of first-year starters on the line. And so I think that'll be something that Clemson can improve upon. And that will have an impact on, big games. I mean, being able to control the line of scrimmage in big games is a critical piece to the puzzle. So again, I think that'll be something to watch for in the spring game. Finally, one last thing that we want to watch for in the Clemson spring game is the receiving corps. There was obviously some inconsistency at wide receiver last year for Clemson. I mean, you had Cornell Powell. He stepped up kind of midway through the year. Amari Rodgers was a versatile alternative, and even Etienne. Etienne kind of got in there for a little bit and was doing some stuff at receiver, but there was just a lot of inconsistency. Missing Justin Ross really hurt Clemson, and even guys like Frank Ladson Jr. and Joe Nagata, who were when they came in, they were tabbed as the receivers of the future in Clemson, right? These guys are going to be the future of the receiving corps. Wide receiver that really has not panned out, and so Frank Ladson, he missed the end of spring ball with another injury last year. Nagata, who only had 4 catches after Clemson's opener last year, is not really even guaranteed a starting role. So Ross he's coming back now. He's returning after a neck surgery last season that was potentially career-ending, but he has not suited up and done full contact yet. So I'm not sure what the status will be for him this fall. I mean, I'd imagine, again, for the spring game, I wouldn't expect him to be out there, but you got to wonder what Justin Ross will be able to do this fall if he is cleared and is able to play contact again. But looking to the fresh faces of the Clemson receiving corps, I think Bo Collins is the standout here. And this is a guy that actually was a teammate of DJ from their high school in St. John Bosco in California. And they obviously already have chemistry together, already have an existing relationship on the field. DJ and Bo Collins have, and I think that's going to be really, really important for DJ's confidence to build. Having a guy out there he's already familiar with. Heck, he played high school ball with this kid, right? He's his high school teammate. They know each other. They're comfortable with each other. Regardless of what the existing Clemson receivers are able to do and who's available and all that, Bo Collins, DJ's former teammate, I think will be a huge part of the offense, at least in the beginning, that allows DJ to get comfortable and to kind of settle into running the offense. And again, that'll be something you'll want to watch during the spring game tomorrow. Because again, DJ's going to target a bunch of guys. He's going to hit some, he's going to hit guys all over the depth chart, but I want to see how he, interacts with Bo Collins, whether that's on the sideline or in the huddle, pre-snap, all that kind of stuff is really what I'm going to be paying attention to, for this Clemson spring game. So I think, again, we've listed at the top of the show, we listed all the spring games that have been scheduled in the Power 5. Really, it just comes down to the ACC and the SEC. If you want, conference-wide spring games to watch, there's a lot of schools in the Big 10, Big 12, and Pac-12 that have not scheduled their games yet. But I think one of the probably the spring games with the biggest potential impact on the fall season for what their respective school, it's got to be Clemson. Clemson's certainly up there. Now, there's some other schools, and we'll talk about them in the next few weeks. This whole month of April is really going to be a lot of shows about spring games, and we're gonna sprinkle a few other topics in as we go along. But spring football is here, and that's what's going to be covered on the show here for the next few weeks. So again, the Clemson spring game I think will be an exciting one to watch. I'm looking forward to it, but there's also going to be some things that I think hopefully will be addressed in that game. Because, as we've illustrated, the last few years, Clemson has had some glaring issues on both sides of the ball that need to be addressed if they want to go back to competing for, national championships. That's going to be something they're going to have to do. But either way, I think that's been it for this edition of After Further Review. Again, thanks so much for tuning in, whether you listen to the show on Facebook or as a podcast. It's available on iTunes, Spotify, anywhere you listen to podcasts. All you got to do is open your favorite podcast app and just search After Further Review. And you can follow, subscribe to the podcast, and new episodes will show up there right on your phone. So you can listen. New episodes usually come out Friday afternoons, subject to change sometimes depending on school and work for me, but I try and let everybody know if an episode's going to be late. So really appreciate that. And again, the last few episodes have really done very, very well. And I really appreciate that support. I mean, we've had almost 2,000 listens just this year alone, so it's really been awesome to see that, and I do appreciate that. So enjoy the spring game tomorrow, enjoy the spring games later this month, and have a great Easter weekend. We'll see you right back here next week. I'm Jay Smith, and this has been After Further Review.